It is our absolute pleasure and honor to host Admiral Mcraven and Robert Barnett tonight. But first, I'll pass it off to the owner of BookHampton, Carolyn Brody, to provide a proper introduction for our featured guests.
Thank you, Catherine. And let me add my welcome to all of you who are on the Zoom webinar. And I'm delighted to welcome Admiral William Mcraven and Bob Barnett to talk about the Hero Code, Lessons Learned from Lives Well Lived. And Admiral Mcraven, I have to say that it is a huge honor to have you with us tonight from Austin, Texas. Admiral Mcraven served 37 years as Navy SEAL, commanding at every level. And as a 4-star admiral, his final assignment was a commander of all U.S. Special Operations Forces. And after retiring from the Navy, he served as Chancellor of the University of Texas system from 2015 to 2018. I have to say that as a bookstore owner, I know his name best as the #1 New York Times bestselling author of Make Your Bed, which is a perennial favorite at BookHampton. It's lived on the cash wrap since the day it came out. And also the New York Times bestseller, Sea Stories, My Life in Special Operations. It's also a privilege to have you here with us tonight because for those of you who may not know, this is launch day for the Hero Code. So it's a busy, busy day, morning till night, and we are tickled and really beyond delighted and thankful to have the Admiral with us. It was, as I say, just released, and already today it's climbed to, it's been bounces between #2 and #4 on what I call the dreaded Amazon. Bob Barnett is freer to say that than I am, but it has really just been flying in the, in the sort of the ether of the bookstore world. And the Admiral will be too humble to talk about this, but Bob has those numbers, at the drop of a hat. So we really is our good fortune to have you here. The Hero Code is a short inspirational book about the qualities of true everyday heroes, sort of really running the gamut. It's about qualities like courage and humility, integrity, perseverance, hope, humor, and forgiveness. And it's about a code of conduct that really becomes the foundation of character. And I personally just finished the book this morning, found it very moving. And I really think it'll serve as a touchstone at a time when we really need things like that. So I am grateful to you, as I'm sure many of the people who have read the book and will read it will be. So now to Bob. It is always a delight to welcome Bob. He's back for another BookHampton virtual event. Bob launched, as you may know, he sort of inaugurated BookHampton's virtual events. I'm sorry to say we're still in the virtual world. Last May when he interviewed Madeleine Albright, and then this summer, the fall, everything kind of blurs together. He also interviewed David Rubenstein, and both were brilliant. And I know tonight will be more brilliant than ever. He is one of the premier authors representatives in the world, with an amazing client list from presidents to first ladies, to Barbara Streisand, to the Prince of Wales, to James Patterson, and the list goes on and on. But most importantly to us at BookHampton and RJ Julia, he's our dear friend, and his family is our dear friend, and he's a loyal customer, and he has made us all proud to be independent booksellers and feel that, we're really doing some good in the world and that we're here to stay. So welcome to both of you, and without further ado, over to you.
Carolyn, thank you. I'll say at the outset, it is an honor to support independent bookstores. I know Bill feels the same way. They're the cornerstone of communities. They're the propagators of children reading. They bring literature to everybody in small communities and give you the chance to actually look at and feel the book and read the flap copy. And you, Carolyn, RJ Julia, BookHampton are to be celebrated. And I know Bill joins me in celebrating you and thanking you. It's a real honor for me to be here with my friend and client, Admiral William Mcraven. The book is called The Hero Code, and for me, he is a hero, and in every way. Those of you who aren't familiar, this was the man who oversaw the operation that got Osama bin Laden, and I think we're about pretty close to the 10-year anniversary. The capture of Saddam Hussein, if you saw Captain Phillips, that was his operation too. And he's written 3 wonderful books, Sea Stories, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, which is a memoir, Make Your Bed, which Carolyn referred to, which I think has sold about 1.5 million copies and is predicated on a speech that has about, believe it or not, 100 million and more YouTube views. And most recently, literally in the bookstores today, The Hero Code. And I like to start by asking Bill some things that go back to Sea Stories, because I'd like the folks to know who this individual is. And before we get to the subject of the Hero Code itself, which will be the main topic tonight. And I went back to Sea Stories and I picked out a couple themes, a couple passages, Bill, that particularly left me inspired and informed. And I'd like to address a couple of those, if I may, Bill, to start off.
Please.
You talk in the book about something that I know is so important to you, which is family. I've had the honor of knowing your wife, who's just an absolutely fabulous person, and have had the opportunity to meet a couple of your children too. And you talk in Sea Stories about leaving your family, about having to go on these deployments for months. And you write, 5 months earlier, I left my wife, Georgiana, my 2 boys, Bill and John, on the pier in San Diego at the USS Okinawa, pulled away for a routine 6-month deployment in the Western Pacific. There are few things more gut-wrenching than watching your family slowly disappear in the distance as your ship sails out of port. While I love being a SEAL, there was nothing in the world that is more important to me than my family. How do you reconcile that? How do you take on this important national security role that you and so many SEALs have, and to the derogation of what you hold so dear, family life? Talk about that, Bill.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. First, let me thank Carolyn and BookHampton. This is, as Bob said, I have a very soft spot in my heart for independent booksellers, always have. And this is just a great opportunity to kind of celebrate this and to be part of it. And to my good friend, Bob Barnett, thanks for taking the time to do this today. To your question, though, this is always the struggle. The sailors that get on ships, the soldiers that get on airplanes and leave, this feeling in the pit of your stomach is hard to describe, but you have it every time you leave. I was always very fortunate in that I had a great partner that I knew could kind of hold down the fort with our kids. And so, a lot of times when you're leaving, your biggest worry is, how will my family do? Again, I was blessed. Georgianne is an extremely strong woman. The kids were great. And so as I left, I knew I could do the nation's business. I knew I could do my job because I had someone at home to take on the tough challenges of managing the family. Now, not everybody has that. And that is always difficult. But you really, I think, have to believe in the mission, which these, again, great soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, and Coast Guardsmen, they do that. And so when you believe in the mission, when you think that you are doing something that is, for a cause greater than yourself, then you are prepared to make that sacrifice. But I will tell you, that sacrifice is never easy, whether it is 6 months or 6 weeks or 6 days. It is always challenging to leave your family.
You also, in Sea Stories, taught me an awful lot about the military. My military experiences, I've told you, was going to the draft board in Waukegan, Illinois, and getting a 1Y. Although I was commander of the ROTC unit at Waukegan High School. One thing that was surprising to me, I guess, as someone who's so grateful of the military and those who serve, was talking about war and how military actually wants war in a way. And you wrote, as terrible as it sounds, every SEAL wants to go to war. War validates your manhood. It reaffirms your courage. It sets you apart from the timid souls and the bench sitters. It builds unbreakable bonds among your wars. It gives your life meaning. Talk about that. Talk about wanting war.
Yeah. You know, this was a passage, Bob, as you know, that I struggled with,
Yes.
and struggled putting it in the book. But I also didn't want to be disingenuous. I mean, the fact of the matter is, we're warriors. You know, we signed up to join the military, to serve the country, to defend the country. We're not looking for war, but when war comes, we are ready to go out and do that. And so, you know, is there this longing to be part of the action, to be part of defending the nation? You bet there is. And I don't know a way to gently talk around it. The fact of the matter is, we're a warrior class. Warriors want to go defend what they value. And so this was the part of, yes, you know, finally 9/11 happens and I get a chance to go serve with these remarkable men and women in the most challenging circumstances. It really does, it's both the highs and the lows of life, but it really is about defending the country. It's about having the opportunity as a warrior to defend the country, something that you value. And I felt it was important to put it in there. And had I not put it in there, had I said, you know, we SEALs, we really don't ever want to go to war, it just wouldn't be true. And I realize that's hard for some people. That doesn't mean we're warmongers. That doesn't mean we are trying to incite war. But when war comes, you want people that are ready to go fight.
Yep. Yeah. No, the way you wrote that, I just did a little selection there. It's very thoughtful and very illustrative. You also have had the experience, which I can't even imagine, of ordering people into situations where they don't come back, sadly. And you addressed that in Sea Stories. You said, I've learned many times over that those who serve do so with their eyes wide open. They overcome their doubts and concerns because they're inspired by their fellow soldiers who serve nobly and not for some political agenda. Those who serve are serving for their hometown, their high school football team, their girlfriends and their boyfriends. They're serving and sacrificing because they believe in the America they grew up in. Talk about that. Talk about people going in the military, particularly career military, understanding what they're facing.
Yeah, you know, particularly now, of course, we've got this, the all-volunteer military, which I remember, you know, when they started talking about the all-volunteer military, when I was just coming in, I thought, well, it'll never work. I mean, who in the world is going to join the military for low pay, to be constantly deployed, to be, you know, having to deal with the dangers and the hardships? And of course, the answer was all these great young Americans. And they came in droves, and the military is as good today as it has ever been, because these people volunteered, raised their hand and said, you know, send me to do the job. So they do come in with their eyes wide open. They understand that there will be sacrifices. They understand that there will be hardships. They understand that some of them may lose their life. And it really is about recognizing that you are serving a higher cause. Now, you don't know that right up front. You know, I used to say that there were these stages that you go through in your time in the military. You know, you kind of start off and it's an adventure, or maybe it's a challenge. You know, you want to go through SEAL training, you want to be challenged, and you get through the SEAL training. The next thing you know, it's an adventure. Join the Navy, see the world. You're traveling around, you're locking out of submarines, you're jumping out of airplanes. And then somewhere along the way, it becomes a profession, where you realize that you are a profession in the profession of arms. But then it becomes a calling. And the calling really has this incredible meaning to the men and women who have seen this as a calling. And I would offer in my career, because I came in after Vietnam, and for most of my career, with the exception of Desert Shield and Desert Storm, I mean, I was training. And so it started off as a challenge. I had the adventure. At some point in time, it became a profession. But for me, I'm not sure it was until after 9/11 when it really became this calling because I saw the incredible sacrifice of these great young men and women. But for the men and women that came in, right at 9/11, let me tell you, they went through those first 3 stages pretty doggone quickly. And to them, it was a calling. So they do go in with their eyes wide open. They understand the risks, and God bless them. They're certainly prepared to accept those risks.
One of the most interesting analyses I thought, as again, not a military person, in the book was your, if you will, explanation of what the sacrifice means. And when we turn to Hero Code in a minute, we'll talk about sacrifice. You're right. Not a day goes by that I don't reflect on the sacrifices of those men and women. It's easy to judge the wars today and say they clearly do not deliver the peace or the change we'd hoped for. But how many Americans or allies would have died in embassies and airplanes and towers and subways and hotels or in the streets if we hadn't eliminated terrorists, the countless others who plotted against us? We may never know, but I take some consolation in believing that somewhere out there is a world leader, brilliant scientist, life-saving doctor, etc., who is alive today because my men did their job. It's enough to let me sleep well at night. Talk about that analysis, Bill.
Yeah, as I was writing the book, Sea Stories, I recalled a moment in 2010. Now, the president had made the decision that we were going to be leaving Iraq at the end of 2010 and really kind of start focusing more or back on Afghanistan. And it was late summer of 2010. I'm down in Baghdad. I'm talking to a number of my SEALs, and they are going out every night, continuing to fight the fight and continuing to go after the bad guys. And at one point in time, one of the senior enlisted guys raises his hand as I'm having this kind of all called with the town hall with my guys. And he said, "Sir, what are we doing? I mean, why are we continuing to do this? We're leaving in 5 or 6 months, and we're going out every night and risking our lives. Why?" And it made me pause momentarily to think, how do you answer it? It's a great question. But the answer came to me, frankly, immediately, because at the time we were going after these suicide bombers that were driving vehicle bombs into the markets in downtown Baghdad, or they were killing American soldiers at checkpoints. And the only response I could think of to the young man was to say, look, you have no idea how your actions, the consequences your actions may have. Tonight, you may stop a guy from driving a car bomb into a market that kills 100 Iraqis. And of those 100 that die, one of them may have gone on to cure cancer. One of them may have become the next prime minister of Iraq. One of them may have, done great things. You just don't know. So you have to do your job. I mean, that's what we sign up to do. We sign up to do our job. And regardless of how tough that job might be. And it was interesting afterwards, I was looking at the men around the room and they got it. They understood that sometimes you don't know the consequences of the good actions you take. You don't know who might have been saved. But again, as people begin to evaluate these wars, I take great solace in the fact that I think we did a lot of good by saving people that otherwise would not have been saved.
Now, the mission that is so well known, coming up in the 10-year anniversary, is Osama bin Laden. And you describe in your book the scene where you invoke Hoosiers and Gene Hackman, and you say, and I'll ask you to talk about that. Gentlemen, each of you have done hundreds of missions just like this one. This mission is no different. Wow, I guess. The court is exactly like the one you played on for the past 10 years. There's no need to do anything differently. Just play your game like you always have, and we will be successful. And then you close. I love this passage. Gentlemen, since 9/11, each one of you has dreamed of being the man going on the mission to get bin Laden. Well, this is the mission, and you're the men. Let's go get bin Laden. Tell us about that moment, Bill. It just sears in my mind how important that was and how you inspired these troops.
Yeah, so it was literally within minutes of the SEALs loading up the helicopters to begin the mission. And so I was in a little command center, and myself and my command sergeant major, Chris Ferris, we were going to go talk to the SEALs right before they got on the helicopters. And it was just a 2-minute walk or so from my little command center to where the SEALs were mustering up, if you will. So as we're walking, frankly, I really hadn't thought about what I was going to say. I didn't think about, well, now this is the moment, you got to say something inspiring. But I walk up to where the SEALs are, and we had a little fire pit, and the guys had a fire going in there. They're putting on their gear. They're making last minute checks of their ammunition, this sort of stuff. And we got up, and the sergeant major says some terrific words. And then he kind of turns to me, and of course, all eyes are kind of looking at me, and I'm thinking, I'm not sure, I hadn't thought about it. What do you say? But once again, it just kind of came to me naturally, because I knew. I mean, I knew that ever since 9/11, every SEAL, every soldier, every Marine, every airman wanted to be on the mission to go get bin Laden. And so that became the words, gentlemen, I know since 9/11, you've wanted to, be the men that goes on the mission to get bin Laden. Well, this is the mission, and you're the men. So let's go get bin Laden. And there was no hoopla. There was no, guys they just kind of nodded, buttoned up their gear, and moments later they boarded the helicopter.
Amazing moment. Let's talk about the hero code. Everyone on this hookup tonight has to commit to buy 5 copies immediately, because it's a wonderful book, chock full of stories and inspiration and just amazing people. As Carolyn said in her introduction, it's just so moving, and it's a short book. You read it in a couple, 3 hours, but you leave it with memories. Let me start by asking you, Bill, why write a book about heroes? How did you come after Make Your Bed, huge success? Why write a book about heroes?
Yeah, well, one, it's always, I've always known that, societies need heroes. I mean, we all need heroes, but societies in particular need heroes because, the heroes inspire the younger generation, frankly, to be better than the current generation. And that's kind of what moves us forward. We get inspired by these stories of courage, of sacrifice, of humility. And once again, it allows, I think, society to move. I say at the very beginning of the book that there is this kind of code in our DNA, so to speak, where, it began the great migration out of Africa. It began, the crossing of the oceans and all of the great discoveries, all of the great challenges in the world were overcome by men and women who had this kind of code of conduct, this courage, this bravery. So I think we always need heroes. And frankly, over the last couple of years, we've had to deal with the pandemic. We've had to deal with the social upheaval. We need heroes more today than ever before. And so this idea, and of course, the fact that I have been so blessed in my career to have encountered so many, many great heroes. I felt it was important to kind of pass on those lessons to both primarily the younger generation, the millennials and the Gen Z, who I am their biggest fan, but also to some of us older folks out there too.
You talked a little bit about this, about the code. You write, this code is not a cipher, a cryptography, or a puzzle to be solved. It's a moral code, an internal code of conduct that drives the human race to explore, to nurture, to comfort, to inspire, to laugh, so that societies can flourish. Why a code? Why call it a code? I understand what you're saying of what it is, but why do you call it a code?
Yeah, I guess I made the linkage. In the military, we have the military code of conduct. And there are articles in the code of conduct that again, they help you drive your conduct to be noble. The definition of a hero, the kind of Webster's definition, is someone we admire because of their noble qualities, and I think that's a great definition, frankly. And so when I thought about the military code of conduct, I realized we all need some sort of code in our life. I mean, when I wrote Make the Bed and gave the 10 lessons in Make Your Bed, I didn't call them codes. I mean, they were little lessons, but the fact of the matter is, making your bed is this kind of code of discipline. You get up every morning, you make your bed, it inspires you to do something else. It's something that you can learn from. So the hero code, of course, it has 10 of these lessons, 10 of these codes, if you will. Again, much like Make Your Bed. But I did feel that it was important for people to have something they could kind of grab a hold of, this idea that, so how do you become courageous? I tell the story of Ashley White about, taking that one step forward. Sometimes to be courageous, it's the first step. You just take one step, get on the helicopter. Take one step, go see the doctor. Take one step and stand up to the bullies. Take one step and do the right thing. So this idea of this code of conduct came from my military background.
For those who haven't yet bought the book, and remember, you owe me 5 copies each. There are 10 chapters, 10 characteristics, codes, whatever you want to call them. And I like to just touch on a couple of them. Each one has just marvelous stories, and just to touch on a couple to give all of you listening tonight a feel for the book. You mentioned Ashley White. That's right where I was going to start. The number 1 chapter and the number 1 characteristic, number 1 code is courage. And the story of Ashley White is certainly an illustration. Please tell us, Bill, about Ashley White.
Well, I put courage first. There's a quote that goes before the beginning of the chapter, and I may not have it exactly right, but it's from Winston Churchill. And he says, courage is the first of human qualities because it guarantees all the rest. If you don't have courage, I'm not sure you're going to have the other great noble qualities if you're not prepared to sacrifice, if you don't have the courage to do the important things. So I wanted to put courage first. And the story of Ashley White, she was a young Army lieutenant who was part of our cultural support team. So when I was in Afghanistan, we would go out, the force would go out every night and have to do missions on Afghan compounds. Kind of a lot of times heavily fortified compounds, but invariably when the SEALs or the Army Special Operations guys or the Rangers got on the compound, of course there were women, and culturally it was inappropriate for a male, whether an Afghan man or an American, to touch the women, and in some cases to kind of look at them. So we didn't want to put ourselves in that awkward position. So we knew we needed to have, female soldiers along with us so that they could engage with both the wives and the sisters and the daughters. So we started the cultural support team, and Ashley White was one of the first people to sign up. And we put them through some incredibly difficult training because they were going out on missions with Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Army Special Operations folks. These were not easy missions. So they had to be physically tough. They had to be mentally strong. We needed the best we could find, the toughest soldiers we could find. And Ashley was one of those. And I talk about the mission, about the night where, unfortunately, she stepped on a pressure plate mine and it cost her life along with 2 of the Rangers that she was with. And her sacrifice, her courage to go out on that mission really struck me deeply. But it wasn't just this remarkable courage on the night that she gave her life. It was the courage every night to take that one step and get on the helicopter. Because let me tell you, when you're in a war, you're scared. You wake up scared, you go through the day scared, you're flying around in helicopters, people are dropping mortars on you, they're shooting at you with rockets. You live with this fear. And the heroes that we see, the courageous men and women we see, take that fear and they drive it deep down inside them, and they put every emotional barricade they can around that fear so they can go do their job with the men and women that they love and respect. And that's what Ashley White did every single night, all the way up to the point where it cost her life. And she gave her life willingly in a way for the men. She knew the risks. And so she was the first hero that I wanted to highlight in the book.
Amazing story, and the whole description is much fuller, obviously, in the book. And I encourage you to read it because it's a tribute to a true hero who had great courage. Your chapter on humility recounts a dinner conversation, I won't ruin the punchline, where someone, let us say, exhibited high humility, which is a characteristic that you probably don't see a lot in the world of military or education. I don't see a lot in the world of law and politics. But this dinner conversation was one great example, one great story of humility. Tell us about that, Bill.
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, I was invited to an event up in Dallas, Texas, and it was a small dinner party. And I'm around the table. I'm there with some notables, to include Roger Staubach, the quarterback, the Hall of Fame quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. So as the dinner starts, I kind of get up, I go around the table, introduce myself. And there's an elderly couple off to my left. And as I'm making introductions, I don't quite catch the gentleman's last name. He just introduces himself as Charlie. So we sit down and have dinner, and I'm flying solo that night. Georgianne was still in Austin. And so I strike up a conversation with this couple, and, just trying to make dinner conversation. And so, where are you from? And he said, well, he's from this small town, New Braunfels, which is not far from my hometown in San Antonio. And, what did you do? He said, well, I was in the Air Force. I said, my father was in the Air Force. My son's in the Air Force. So for the next about hour and a half, we talk. But I can't get much out of him other than the fact that he was in the Air Force. All he wants to do is talk about my family. He wants to know about my son who's in the Air Force, my other children. He wants to know where I met my wife, how I'm doing. I mean, the whole conversation kind of revolved around me. And at the end of the evening, he said, hey, my wife Dottie and I, we'd love to have you in New Braunfels sometime. And I told him I really hope to be able to take him up on that invitation. Well, as we're leaving the dinner party, Roger Staubach comes up to me and he says, I see you were talking to Charlie. I said, yeah, really nice guy. He goes, can you imagine what that must have been like? I said, I'm sorry, what are you talking about, Roger? I mean, can you imagine what? Walking on the moon. Can you imagine walking on the moon? I said, what are you? And then it occurred to me, Charlie was General Charles Duke, the youngest man ever to walk on the moon. And never once in that hour and a half conversation did he mention the simple little fact that he had walked on the moon. And as I later kind of pulled the string on this, I did find out, however, that his humility was a little bit hard won. He had come back from the moon, again, the youngest man ever to walk on the moon, and all the press and all the accolades, and he struggled initially with it. His wife Dottie became a Christian. He followed in her footsteps, and today in his 80s, he is as sharp as ever. And again, to me, this idea of humility, this idea that, look, if you're humble, then you appreciate the little things in life a lot more. And if you're humble, you also realize that our differences really aren't all that great. And the reason humility is such a noble quality is I think it also binds us together as people, because when you're humble, you realize that you're not as far apart from the man or woman that you happen to bump in on the streets.
Great story and a great lesson for all of us. One of the many in this wonderful book. The chapter on sacrifice, you mentioned sacrifice, chapter on sacrifice is particularly striking. You tell the story of Ralph Johnson, which I'd like you to expound on, but I also want you to talk about, Bill, what you say here, because a lot of the people in this book are known, some not known, but their stories are known. But you say, for most of us, our sacrifices do not come in one shining moment of extraordinary value. For most of us, our sacrifices are little acts of giving that build upon themselves and over time become something worthwhile, something remarkable. The single mother who works 2 jobs, the teacher who labors over a struggling student, the cop who coaches youth basketball, the child who nurses their ailing parents. What makes these sacrifices so heroic is that there are no adoring crowds, no awards, no gilded words, nothing accrues to you but the knowledge that your actions were noble, an act of grace with no expectation of gratitude. Tell us about Ralph Johnson, and then if you will reflect on ordinary sacrifice.
So the story of Ralph Johnson is a short one, but profound. It was short because in 1968, Ralph Johnson was about 19 years old in Vietnam. He and his reconnaissance element called Texas Pete was on a hill in Vietnam. The hill got overrun by North Vietnamese and Viet Cong. They fought them off as long as they could. It was a dramatic firefight, grenades being thrown, satchels of demolition being thrown. And at one point in time, a grenade was thrown in the the foxhole where Ralph Johnson was with two of his fellow Marines, and Ralph sacrificed his life and jumped on that grenade to save his fellow Marines. Ralph Johnson was this young black man from Charleston, South Carolina, and he, just remarkable in his actions that day. And the fact about it was, back to your point about sacrifice, there were no adoring crowds at the time. Ralph Johnson didn't think that this sacrifice was somehow going to accrue to him and get the recognition that it later deserved, which was the Medal of Honor. Ralph Johnson was recognized for the Medal of Honor, and I talk about the fact that I happened to be there at the commissioning ceremony for the USS Ralph Johnson, one of our brand new destroyers, because the military, the Marine Corps, the Navy, the nation recognized this young man's sacrifice. But the point I try to make, Bob, in the book is what you raised, which is, look, you don't have to have these remarkable levels of sacrifice to really be a hero, to have the noble cause, because parents sacrifice, teachers sacrifice, and their sacrifices, I think, add up over time and create this level of heroism that is important for all of us.
One of my favorite stories in the book comes under the chapter of duty. And it's the story of a young airman who was actually a woman who was there for guarding in the context of a visit by President Obama. I love this story. It says so much. Please tell us about that young airman.
Yeah, so I was in Afghanistan, and President Obama was making a visit to Afghanistan to meet with President Karzai. So Air Force One came into Bagram Air Force Base, which is in the center of Afghanistan, where my base was. I was not scheduled to meet with the president. He was going to get on a helicopter and immediately fly from Bagram, about an hour flight, into Kabul, the capital city. Well, as Air Force One comes in, the weather comes in, and it becomes too risky for the president to fly through the weather to get to Kabul. So I am literally in the gymnasium, in the gym working out, and I get this call that the general in charge of President Obama's visit needs me to come over immediately to brief the president on the work we're doing in Afghanistan. So of course, he wants me there in 20 minutes. I look at my clock, I'm thinking, oh my goodness. So I rush out of the gym, I get changed, I get in the convoy, and I'm looking at my clock, and I've got about 10 minutes, but it's a short drive. We're going to go across the main road to the back gate. So we get to the back gate, got about 5 minutes left. We're looking good. The sergeant in my vehicle gets out. There's a young female gate guard, real person. In the book, I call her Airman Jackson, not her real name, but a real person. So the sergeant gets out, and he goes up to Airman Jackson, petite young lady, and he's kind of towering over, and I can see through my window. And the sergeant, he's calm, he's trying to explain, and then all of a sudden you can see he gets a little excited, hands are moving, he's pointing at the watch, and he comes back, storms back to the car, and we roll down the window, and he says, "Sir, she won't let us through. We're not cleared to get through. We're not on the list of approved people." I said, "Okay." So the command sergeant major, a very senior enlisted guy, says, "Sir, I got this." So the sergeant major gets out of the car, and I'm watching him. He walks up to the young airman, and same thing, very calmly at first, and then before long, hands are moving, watches are being tapped, and then a few minutes later, he storms back, and he says, "Sir, she won't budge. She just won't let us through." Of course, I'm thinking, I'm a 3-star admiral. I'll take care of this. So I get out of the car, and I go up to this young airman, and I again look at her name tag, and I said, "Airman Jackson, I'm Admiral Mcraven." I said, "I've got a meeting with the president like right now. So, you really need to let us through." And she said, "Sir," she's kind of standing her ground. I can tell she's a little nervous. And she says, "Sir, I'm sorry, but you're not on the approved list." Of course, I'm taking a deep breath, trying to control myself. And we have a discussion. At one point in time, she says to me, "I'm sorry, sir, I've got a job to do, and you're not on the approved list. And until you're on the approved list, I can't let you through. Okay, so I go back frustrated. I go back and sit in the car. And about 10 minutes later, gate goes up, we go through, I get to the president. President never mentions the fact that we're 10 minutes late. Well, when the briefing's over, I come back and we're driving back through the same gate. So I have the convoy pull off to the side. I get out of the car and I walk up to Airman Jackson. And again, I'm kind of towering over and I said, Airman Jackson, do you know that I was 10 minutes late to brief the President of the United States? Yes, sir. You wouldn't let us through when my sergeant asked you. You wouldn't let us through when my command sergeant major asked you. And you wouldn't let us through when I asked you, and I'm a 3-star admiral. Yes, sir. And then I reached into my pocket, pulled out my command challenge coin, which is given only to soldiers that do exceptional work. And I put it in her hand and I said, you did exactly the right thing. You can come work for me anytime. And then she said something to me. She said, sir, I was just doing my duty. And the point of the story isn't that Airman Jackson was blindly doing her duty. The fact of the matter is, we have a thing called General Order Number 1 in the military. And I think it talks about a lot bigger issues, but it's for centuries at their post. And it says, you know, I will take care of my post and everything within in view, meaning that you have a responsibility to carry out your duty. Airman Jackson had to do her job. And, you know, there was I'm sure some sergeant that was over her and some captain that was over him and some colonel that was over the captain and some general that was over the colonels. But all of those combined together to ensure that the President of the United States had a safe visit. And as I looked at the people that worked for me, I thought about, you know, the cook that made sure that the Green Berets got their turkey on Thanksgiving. He didn't seem to think that was a big deal, but it was to those young Green Berets who wanted that turkey on Thanksgiving. I remember this, I had another great airman who was worried about whether or not the paperwork they were doing was of any value until a widow of a fallen hero called up and said, thanks for taking care of the paperwork. Duty is about doing your job. It's about doing your job to the best of your ability. And I think this sense of duty really is a noble quality that we really need to instill in people, whether you're flipping hamburgers at McDonald's, whether you're guarding a gate, or I also talk about, you know, John McCain in that same story about the duty that he performed in following the code of conduct. Duty is important.
Thank you for that wonderful, wonderful story. I'm going to ask you one more, and then I'm going to turn it over to Catherine for a couple of the wonderful questions I see in the chat box from the audience, and then I'll come back with a couple final ones if that's okay. One of the 10 in the code is humor, which I found interesting that humor was in there. I believe in that. I'm so glad to see it in there. But you tell a story of at the grinder, and it's a question involving height. And I wish you'd tell that story to our attendees tonight.
Yeah, you know, I do think, and I thought about humor for a long time, you know, whether it was really one of these noble qualities. But the reason I thought humor was so important to put in the book was about the fact that I saw it used so many times by the young soldiers that were injured in combat, that had lost legs and arms or had these horrible blasts. And they used humor to tell the enemy, hey, you haven't defeated me. I may have lost a leg, I may have lost an arm, but I can still laugh about it. And then, of course, I saw humor used in eulogies of these remarkable fallen heroes to soften the blow. But I would offer in the military, you know, we really have learned to understand the importance of humor. And the story I tell at the beginning is when I was a young ensign, I had just reported to my first SEAL team. And every morning, the SEALs would gather on this asphalt slab where we would do our morning PT. And as I'm walking out of there, my very first day on the job, the executive officer or more senior officer, you know, welcomes me to the team and says, "Oh, Ensign Mcraven," says, "Oh, the enlisted guys, the chief petty officers in particular, they are going to welcome you with open arms." You know, they love to have new ensigns, you know, in as part of the PT circle. Well, of course, I saw a little twinkle in his eye and I knew something was up. But as we get into the circle, and we generally had, 50, 60, 70 guys, we get in the circle, oh, it starts right off. Somebody starts, Ensign Mcraven, where are you from? Well, I'm from Texas. Well, where'd you go to school? I heard you went to Texas A&M. And of course, I went to that other school in Texas, the University of Texas. And I had to explain that to them. And then before long, they are taking aim at everything I had. And again, the lesson learned for here was you've got to be able to laugh at yourself. You've got to not be offended by the slights, because the humor in the SEAL teams is really what allowed you to get over the tough times. When you had a bad day, guys wouldn't come up and they wouldn't kind of go, oh, I'm really sorry. They'd harass you unmercifully because they wanted you to know, oh, get over it. It's not that bad. You'll be okay. Or, when things went overly well for you, they didn't want your head to get inflated, so they'd come in once again and kind of cut you down to size. And it was always done in a way that was never hurtful, always, I think, constructive. So I did think that humor was a great quality, because I saw it used so many times in combat to shield the great soldiers from the pains that they had to deal with.
Thank you. Catherine, I'm going to flip it back to you for a couple of questions, and then I'll come back.
Thanks so much, Bob. And thank you, Admiral, for sharing those stories with us. I certainly am inspired to pick up the book and read some more of those incredible everyday hero stories. So we do have a few questions from our audience here. First, congratulations on the Hero Code. A question for you, Admiral. What is one piece of advice you would give a young officer and SEAL trainee? Or actually, I should say, what piece of advice would you give to yourself as a young officer and SEAL trainee? And don't say make your bed.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to answer both of those questions, actually. When I went through SEAL training, we had this quote we said all the time: take it one evolution at a time. So as part of SEAL training, because we are becoming Navy frogmen, we start off as tadpoles and we evolve into frogmen. So each event that you had, every long run, every long swim was an evolution. It was just an event. But we learned to take things one evolution at a time. And the reason that was important was, if you started off your day and you took a look at the calendar and you said, oh my gosh, we've got 2 hours of calisthenics, followed by a 4-mile soft sand run, followed by a 3-mile open ocean swim. You get a short break, you go to chow, you come back, you have an obstacle course you got to do, you get another short break, then you go do another couple hours of calisthenics. And then if you don't screw up in the day, you get to go home around 6 o'clock. But if you screw up, you get another 2 hours of calisthenics. If you looked at your day, it would scare you. And if you thought, this is one day and I've got 5 days and then a month and then 6 months, then guys would struggle with it because the event horizon was too far. You had to do the best you could at the evolution, the event you were doing. So go out and do the 4-mile run as well as you can. And the reason that this idea was important to me was that I found in my career, and I tell a lot of young kids today, as they are trying to plan out their whole life, all you can do is smile, because life never goes as planned. And I've always told folks, look, just do the best job you can where you are right now. Folks, it's not to say that you shouldn't have some sort of goals in life, but do the best job you can. And if you do that, then you'll do well in the next job and the next job. Just do the best you can. But for the young kids going through SEAL training, there's always just one golden rule: you just don't quit. You don't have to be the biggest, the strongest, the fastest. You just don't quit, and you'll make it through SEAL training.
That's great advice, I think, for really anyone at any stage of their life. Another question for you, Admiral. You've been active in comments about political leadership in our country, which some would regard as a change for former military leaders. What compels you to take a different course in this regard? And do you think other former military leaders should be more assertive in this context?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've told people before, we have this unwritten code among senior officers that you don't write bad things. You don't, go after the commander in chief. And I think that that is a good unwritten code. And I've told folks when they criticize me for having, made comments in public, I've always said that's fair criticism. It's fair criticism. So I knew, and I know every time I make public comments about anything, that I've got to be prepared to kind of suffer the slings and arrows that go with the criticism. But, I also think that I've got to wake up and look myself in the mirror and decide whether I think I'm doing the right thing. I mean, I don't judge anyone else who either speaks out or doesn't speak out. That's entirely up to them. But in my case, I felt it was important to speak up, and recognizing that, you get a lot of hate mail, you lose a lot of friends sometimes, but it's something that I felt was important to talk about.
Absolutely. And for a final question, as a bookseller, I just really appreciate this last one here. What novel or writer have you read about the Navy, U.S. military, special ops, and in spite of it being fiction, you thought, yeah, that's pretty darn close?
Yeah, Anton Meyer, has a great writer, but I would offer my favorite book is All Quiet on the Western Front. It's a short read, and the thing that I like about it is that it's World War I. It's written from a German soldier's perspective, and the reason I think that this is important is because the writer, who was German, who spent a little time at the front, not much, but he captured exactly what soldiers think, what soldiers do, what soldiers worry about. And I realized in reading it, the German soldier was concerned about exactly the same thing as the American soldier, the French soldier, the British soldier. Soldiers are soldiers sometimes. People believe in their country. They believe in what they're fighting for. And so you realize as a military soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine, that the other people on the other side of the fence from you, or the trench in this case, you have to understand that they are people too, that they have values too, whether you agree with them or not. You have to be prepared to deal with that. So I always thought All Quiet on the Western Front was a great, really did a great job of capturing a soldier's life.
Bill will sell a few of those books tonight too. Bill, a couple last questions. You spent a lot of time researching this and thinking it through and capturing these stories. And put you on the spot. Of all the virtues in the book, which one do you think is most important for a hero?
Yeah, a great question, Bob. And I have kind of thought through this. Again, courage is the first, because it does guarantee all the rest. But actually, I think the most important quality is forgiveness. It's the last story in the book. And the point I make in it is, society today, we seem to be easily aggrieved. The least little slight offends people, and they want to hang on to the anger because they feel like it empowers them, that it gives them some sort of sense of retribution against whoever slighted them. And yet you see these examples of these remarkable heroes that forgave people that committed unforgivable acts. And so we have to ask ourselves, if those people can learn to forgive, if they can forgive when their loved ones' lives have been taken away, can't we forgive the little slights here and there? And wouldn't we be better people, a better society, if we just learned how to forgive a little quicker?
In the epilogue, Bill, you explained that you were kind of afraid of leaving the military because you didn't think you would find the same kind of heroes as those you saw in uniform. But then you say you were wrong about that. Tell us about that.
I was so wrong. And it's not that I didn't think I'd see them, but I didn't think I would see them to the degree that I did in the military. I mean, again, I was fortunate in my time, my 37 years, to just be around some remarkable heroes. But all of a sudden, I become the chancellor of the University of Texas, and I'm thinking, am I going to see the kind of character and the humility and the integrity and the sense of sacrifice? And the answer was, you bet. Those heroes are everywhere. It was particularly evident to me during Hurricane Harvey, which hit here in Texas and really devastated Houston. And to watch, neighbor helping neighbor, to see people coming from not just Texas, but all around the country and the world to help out was just incredible. Their courage was incredible. Their humility was incredible. Their sacrifice, this perseverance of getting through Hurricane Harvey. But it is also the first responders that I've met. And of course, since the pandemic, you see the remarkable healthcare workers and the delivery people early on. You don't think about it now, but if you recall early on in the pandemic, these people were taking a gamble. They were taking a risk. So I found, heroes in everyday life that have these great noble qualities that I hope will continue to move, and I know will continue to move this country forward.
One final reflection. I've loved all three of your books and just learned so much from them. I think the takeaway that I quote most is from the beginning of Sea Stories, when you reflect on what life is and what you think about life itself, memoir context of Sea Stories. And you quote your father as saying, Bill, it's all how you remember it. Right. Which is, I think, a great insight. Talk about that for a minute, Bill, as closing remarks.
Yeah, my father was a great storyteller. And while he didn't spend a lot of time telling those stories to me, I would always overhear it as he would talk with his fighter pilot buddies. But very late in his life, we got into this conversation and we were reminiscing about something. And I knew it had been a tough time in his life because my father, this kind of greatest generation, they were children of World War I. They were children of the Great Depression. All the men went off to World War II. My dad fought in World War II in Korea. And yet, if you listen to the stories, you wouldn't know about any of the struggles. You wouldn't know about the Great Depression. You wouldn't know about the challenges that he had in World War II in Korea. And that's when he turned to me and he said, Bill, life is all how you remember it. And so as I start Sea Stories, I tell folks, look, this is how I remembered my life. And it was a pretty good one. That's not to say that you hide the bad things that happen to you. But I've been fortunate that the good things seem to rise to the top and are crisper in my memory.
Let me close by saying thank you to all of you who attended tonight, including my sister, my niece, my daughter, whole family's here. And so I say hi to them, and my wife, of course. And I want to thank RJ Julia and BookHampton for being strong and courageous, independent bookstores that bring to their communities and nationwide, because you can order by mail, great literature, including this wonderful book. And finally, let me thank a person I just admire and respect, Admiral William Mcraven. Thank you for what you've done for our country. Thank you for these wonderful books, including Hero Code, which, remember, each of you, 5 copies. And thank you most of all to you and Georgianne for being friends to Rita and me. And with that, I will say good night to everyone.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Admiral. We really enjoyed having you here this evening, and I'd like to reiterate Bob's message that, yes, we do have copies at all 3 stores. They are all signed, and we encourage you to pick up 1, 2, 5, 10, however many you think, maybe, early Christmas presents, birthday presents. We're here for you. So thank you both again for joining us this evening, and all of our attendees. Have a great evening.